Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name's Kelly Gardner, and I'm a writer. I write historical fiction, fantasy, and, of course, crime for readers of all ages. And on behalf of Sisters in Crime Australia, I'd like to welcome you tonight to talk about Mysteries with History, or History Mysteries. It's wonderful to see you all here, and thank you for coming to the earlier start time. And please, let's take this opportunity to welcome our panel. We've got Nalima Rao, Alison Goodman, and Marg Hickey. Before we begin, and particularly on this weekend, I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting on the lands of the Kulin Nation. This is Bunurong country. It was never ceded. And I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land and their continuing cultural connection to country, and pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and particularly to their storytellers, because that's what we're here to talk about this evening. What we're doing this evening is I'm sure many of you have been to a Sisters event before, so you'll know we have a panel at the beginning. Then we have a break, and after that, after you have all been hard sold some raffle tickets, there will be some audience questions. So please, you don't need to try and ask questions while we're talking. You'll have plenty of time for that afterwards. If you can't see, please make sure that you shift around so that you've got a good line of sight. Put your phones on silent. We've just all remembered to do that. Oh, Marg, have you remembered? Yes. If one rings, it'll be Marg's.
Bernie.
So we'll be talking for about an hour, and then we'll break for drinks, raffle tickets. The authors are happy to sign books for you, and there is a stall up the back, thank you very much, to Sun Bookshop, who are long-term supporters of Sisters in Crime, and they have copies of the authors' books there for you to buy, which of course you will buy many. Christmas, I am told, is only 9 weeks away. So buy up, and the authors are happy to sign them. Sorry. But please, let's thank Sun Bookshop for all their support of the Sisters over many years. And of course, if you're a member of Sisters in Crime, and if you aren't, why not, you should be able to get a 10% discount as well. So in the second half, we'll have questions from the audience, and we also have a prize for the best question, which is going to be judged today by Louisa Larkin. Where are you? There's Louisa. So think about a really brainy question. Remember, questions have a question mark at the end. And the winner of the best question, yes, will win a copy of Kerry Greenwood's Murder in Williamstown. Ooh. So, Louisa is, I'm told, open to bribes, however. Now, I know you're all actually here for this because at 9:30 we will be holding a brief annual general meeting of Sisters in Crime. If you're a member, we'd appreciate you sticking around, as we have to have a quorum. You can join tonight, of course, if you're not a member. And then we'll be heading downstairs for drinks. And again, feel free to join us. But let me first introduce the panel. In the middle is Alison Goodman, who is a Melbourne-based author of fantasy and historical fiction. She's the author of 8 novels, including the award-winning Lady Helen trilogy, which I love. Yeah. It's like Regency meets Buffy, I think is how you feel. And Eon and Iona, a New York Times best-selling fantasy duology. Her latest book is The Benevolent Society of Ill-Mannered Ladies.
Such a great title. And aren't we all ill-mannered?
We're all ill-mannered here. That's quite the point. And it was recently longlisted for the ARA Historical Fiction Award for the Historical Novel Society. Alison has recently completed her PhD, focused on creative writing, historical research and the Regency era. She is fueled by coffee and will travel a long way for a good scone. On my left is Nalima Rao. He's a Fijian Indian Australian who has always referred to herself as culturally confused. We might talk a bit about that. She's since learned that we are all confused in some way and has been published on the topic of that confusion by SBS as part of the SBS Emerging Writers Competition. So now she feels better about the whole thing. When she isn't writing, Nalima can be found wrangling data in her day job and wandering around Melbourne laneways in search of the next new wine bar. Hang on, I've got to show you her book. Sorry about the post-its. A Disappearance in Fiji is her first novel and she's currently working on the second in the series. Okay, now you can clap. The reason I have post-its stuck on everybody's covers is so that I remember the characters' names, because when you've got all those characters in your head, you sometimes forget crucial people. Say, you know that guy? Margaret Hickey is an award-winning author and playwright from Northeast Victoria. She has a PhD in creative writing. And is deeply interested in rural lives and communities. She's the author of 3 best-selling crime novels, Cutter's End, Stone Town, which was shortlisted for the 2023 David Awards, and now Broken Bay, plus a collection of short stories. Please welcome Marg and the whole panel. So, tonight we're here to talk about history and the past. The past is a constant presence in crime writing of all kinds. In the classic Gothic tradition, the ghostly past bleeds into the present, sometimes literally, as it does in Marg's book, Broken Bay, where a new grief is wrapped up in a cold case from decades earlier. Even when a crime happens a day or an hour ago, the amateur sleuth or detective has to unravel the threads of the past to reveal the truth of the now. Mysterious motives, embedded clues, witness or victim histories matter. As one of Marg's characters says, every day and in small increments we rewrite history. For some writers, like Alison and Nalima, and me for that matter, the past is also the world in which our stories take shape. So let's start there. Marg, could we start with you actually? What do you think are the key ingredients for you in crime writing which draws on history? Why do we love reading it?
The way I write, when we talk about history in my books, it's sort of decades earlier, not hundreds of years earlier. So my history is relatively recent. And what I hope people like about mine and what I enjoy writing is that the people involved in the crimes and the families involved are usually decades later, but I have to write them in their younger selves. So I like that because I like seeing how people age and what a decade, perhaps with trauma involved, can do to a person, how it ages you and how some things remain and some things change. So that's what I like reading in other sorts of crime, which is my own, which is the recent crimes. But yes, it's how people change and how people connected to crimes, how being part of it can affect them adversely or make them angry or make them want revenge, and how that manifests in different personalities.
Thank you. Alison, what do you think, because your books are more set in the past, set in the Georgian time, what do you think why do we love reading historical crime?
Yeah, I think just reading straight historical fiction, there's the setting is almost a character. We love that kind of rich setting of being able to be immersed in that time. And I personally like that narrative drive of crime. There's a plot there's going to be answers and a sense of will justice prevail. And of course, in past times, justice was a very different thing. We didn't have a police force in the Regency times. There was the Bow Street Runners, which was a very early form of it. And the court system was very different. The ordinary citizen could definitely make a citizen's arrest and march someone off to the magistrate. And that happened, that was the main way of people being arrested. And there was also the Bloody 300, which were these awful crimes that you could just get hanged or transported for, and they were mainly to do with property, which kind of put the emphasis on what people owned very much in the hierarchical society. So for me, it's about how that value system in the past fed into the justice system, and how people dealt within these kind of quite, if you like, kind of like almost a Wild West of law and lawlessness in the past. So that's what I find, really.
Thank you. And Nalima?
Yeah, probably similar themes in terms of I enjoy reading historical fiction generally for learning. So I love to learn about the time and the place, and I think crime in particular allows you to explore the tensions of what's going on in that society at the time. So the crime, in my case in particular, the crime is very related to political and racial tensions that are going on in the time of the setting. So yeah, that's probably what I enjoy most about reading historical crime.
Thank you. So we should just, for those of you who haven't read them, do you want to all just very briefly say when and where your books are set, and kind of just a tiny little, no spoilers, just a tiny little hint
Do the log line.
about the plot? Yeah. Actually, let's start with you.
So my book, Broken Bay, is set along the Limestone Coast, that fabulous coast that's south of Mount Gambier and runs along the coastline to almost to Bridgewater in Victoria. And it's jagged cliffs, it's wild oceans, but it's sinkholes, and there's about 50 known sinkholes on the Limestone Coast. And some of them, my family are dairy farmers from down there, and some of them are on farmers' land, and they can be from me to Calais away, and they're the most beautiful blue, but if you pop your head underneath, there's the chasms half the size of the MCG. They're really incredible. So that's where mine is set, and it's set in current day, but then with the crime 20 years earlier. So it was 20 years from early 2000s.
Oh, my novel is set in 1812. This is my specialist year and my mastermind, my mastermind subject. And it's set in London and Cheltenham and King's Lynn, actually. So we go. The novel is in 3 shorter novellas that are cases, which is a kind of like a nod to Holmes and Watson. And it's about 2 spinster twin sisters who are 42 years old, and they're using their privilege and invisibility as old maids to pull other women out of peril. That's great.
And mine's set in Fiji in 1914, and that's a time period when Indians were being taken to Fiji to work in the cane fields as indentured labourers, which is, I'm getting in trouble for not holding the microphone close enough. More? Oh my God, I'm going to be eating this thing.
Ice cream.
Ice cream. Okay, I've got it. I need to eat more ice cream. So 1914, Fiji, Indians being taken to work in the cane fields as labourers, indentured labourers, and I've got a police officer who's in Fiji. He doesn't really want to be there, and he's sent out to the plantation to investigate a crime on the plantation and witnesses what life is like for the indentured labourers, and has to figure out what's going on this plantation. Bad things are happening.
We're going to have to try and talk about them without spoilers. But can I just go back to that idea? One of the things that happens in Broken Bay is that secrets of the 20 years, people have kept secrets, and that's often we find in crime fiction set. Whenever it's set, secrets emerge, and that's one of the things that we often see. So it's set in the present, but the past is sort of coming in to the present. But one of the things I think I wanted to ask you about, all of you, is when we're writing about these things that are set in the past, how much are we writing about the present as well. I mean, you're consciously doing that,
Yes.
Mark, but I think with historical fiction, it's something that I always wonder about. How much are we writing about gender? How much are we writing about colonialism and those sorts of things? So, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, sure. So, in terms of the present, like the very immediate, obvious version of this is that, like, indentured labour is still going on. I heard a statistic that said something like the amount of people in slavery is increasing, not decreasing at the moment. And that's, I mean, this was indentured labour. It was introduced because slavery had been outlawed in the British Empire, but it was slavery by another name, just with a time limit on it. And the abuses were horrible, and it was an exploitative contract. The people who were signing up for it were incredibly vulnerable, and the same thing is happening today. So I'm sure we've all heard about things in the Middle East with people having their passports taken away from them and then living in shipping containers. So that's still very much a relevant topic.
Well, I suppose in my book, very much a conscious decision to write about gender and women's place in society then. And also it's quite an interesting thing to walk the line between a mind, or trying to reach from a mindset of a 19th century or early 19th century woman, and also make it accessible to a 21st century woman or reader. So I was looking for the strands of modern thinking in that time. So one of my main characters, the point of view character, is Lady Augusta, and she's an apostate. She's lost her faith. And I was looking for sort of how can I weave that in, and atheism was beginning to be written about and talked about openly, because we're in England, which is very much Church of England and very, very strictly Church of England. And I found out that Shelley, the poet, had been expelled from his university because he'd written a pamphlet about atheism. So these things were beginning to feed into it. The abolitionists enabled me to write about slavery and things like that, because there's that modern mindset already beginning to show through. So when I was creating my characters, I was very aware of the modern reader, but also the fact that I had to marry it with a 19th century mindset so that it didn't become too anachronistic.
Yeah, I mean, mine again. Mine is only 20, but I suppose things still do happen. When I was at the launch in Mount Gambier, where I had the launch for Broken Bay, a sinkhole opened up, and on Margaret Street, and a split second I thought, is this the greatest publicity coup Penguin has ever? And so things are happening all the time like that, as well as, and the book talks about how there was 11 deaths in caves in the south from mostly young kids in the late 60s and 70s, and that's why a lot of farmers don't declare now when there's sinkholes open up on their properties, because they know that kind of intrepid, adventurous, kind of wild, overconfident youth streak still exists. It doesn't go away. It's still going to happen.
Don't go down those sinkholes. You know how Mark said it's beautiful and blue and you put your head... Don't do that. If you read this book, you will know. Don't go... I just wanted to pick up, actually, what Alison was talking about there, about the making the past accessible to the modern reader. And perhaps for both of you, how did you approach questions of voice and tone when you're writing something that is set, and also the worldview, perhaps, because you're having to write about, you're having to put these revolting ideas in people's mouths, like the plantation owners' mouths. How do you? What approaches do you use to sort of bringing those voices and worldviews of the past to the modern reader? Alison first.
Yeah, look, it's I've got a character who is the two main characters' brother, and he's
insufferable.
He's insufferable. That's a good word. He's insufferable. So I had a great deal of fun because he stands for society in that way. He's bringing the conservative, entitled, literally entitled male view, and so building those kind of mindsets, they're still prevalent in our society. Building the more enlightened characters was a bit trickier because it's as I said, where we have to find those threads that exist. I think that in the end, it's probably impossible to really recreate an early 19th century mindset because our brains are literally different. We've lived through different things, and the way that we create is not going to enable that kind of true recreation. So we go for a certain sense of authenticity, and that authenticity we hope will carry the reader through the story. Because I'm also trying to marry that authenticity with humour. So that's a kind of another layer of challenge for the writer to write a humorous story set in that time. So yeah, it's a kind of a juggling act of bringing in that. I suppose I'm trying to describe it. I've got a built-in anachronistic meter. It's kind of like some people have a bullshit meter. I think there's when they're writing and this kind of stuff. I'm going, is this too far? And I know that I can fairly say, well, no, that's actually too modern when a word comes up. And so that's a too modern a word. And also you've got good editors who can say, actually, no, that's coming in too modern. That even just the way you use syntax can sometimes be too modern. So that's just right down to the micro level. It's how you use that syntax to create that sense of the era. And I think probably I've got off subject, sorry.
No, that was right. That was spot on. Thank you. Nalima?
So I had some challenges on this front. I have a number of different sort of racial and social groups in a novel, and particularly from the perspective of the indentured labourers. They were all or mostly illiterate, so I didn't have a lot of their voice. So all of my research, everything was written from a very Eurocentric voice, a very Western voice, a very English voice, basically. So there's lots of resources out there. The Fiji Times, that I could access all of the Fiji Times from the early 1900s, and a lot of it was actually quite liberal in terms of political views, but it is all written with the voice of the Australians, the British, the Australians, and the New Zealanders, who are the predominant people there. So I struggled in terms of voice for my Indian characters. I basically had to imagine it. There was a little bit of oral history that I could find, but for the most part I had to imagine it. And the good thing about it is no one writes about Fiji. No one writes about Fijian Indians. So if I got it wrong, no one can tell me. And some like there on the micro level, as you were talking about, there were just small things to try and make it accessible to a modern reader, which is things like all of the Indian names of the time were really complicated. So my great-grandmother's name was Aliamma, my grandmother's name was Magamma. If I had a book full of Aliammas and Magammas, I don't think anyone would be able to read it. So I've used modern names, so I've made a deliberate choice to use modern Indian names that are a lot easier to read rather than using what's actually historically accurate.
That's fascinating. But you think about the incredibly long names full of apostrophes that readers read in fantasy novels.
That's true.
Can I ask you also about I wondered whether there were ethical decisions you had to make about words that you used that those plantation owners, for example, would have used to their people who were basically slaves, that sort of thing, or describing, the things they say to the detective.
Are we going to be offended if I use the word? Okay, so the term that was used for the indentured labourers at the time was coolie, which is a word I find in Australia it doesn't really cause too many raised eyebrows, but I remember pitching the idea to another group of writers in the UK, and I used the working title of Constable Coolie, and I just got crickets in the room because it is a word that means a lot to a British audience. So it's a derogatory term. It was used with Indians and Chinese labourers, but at the time, again, in the Fiji Times, that term would be used by a liberal voice. So it wasn't like it was a slur like we think of a slur that you sort of say it behind closed doors. This was just the term at the time. So it's all the way through the book, and even my Indian police officer uses that term. The ethical decision for me was, this is the historically accurate term. I am going to put this in the book.
But you had to make a conscious decision about that.
Yeah, I did. And I have felt uncomfortable at times. I did a reading where that word was all the way through the reading, and I kind of didn't think about it until I was just about to do the reading and went, it's going to be blah, 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 coolie, blah, 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 coolie. Is this going to be okay? So it is something that sits a little bit uncomfortably, but for historical accuracy, I thought it was important.
And it's good to have the discussion, I suppose. I remember people saying it when I was little. Like, I think it was in wide use, at least in World War II. Yeah, not that I'm quite that old. I am historical, but not that bad.
I had a different ethical question to come up for me, because I've used Madame D'Arblay, who was Fanny Burney, letter within the book. I use it as a basis for something. So my ethical question was, is it my right to actually take her words and use it within the book? And also, her words were probably a little bit too inaccessible for the audience. So I was going to be paraphrasing it. So that was my question. Can I do that? And for why am I using it? And what does the reader get from it? And can I do that? And I decided to do it because it's a truly amazing document. It's the letter from Fanny Burney to her sister-in-law about her mastectomy without anaesthetic in Paris in 1811. And of course, it's one of the first documents we have from the woman's point of view of that procedure. And I felt that it was such an important document. Not many people knew about it. When I talk about it, they say, this is true, this is real. And I note that in my author note, because it's such an important document and so vivid. She was a diarist and a novelist. She wrote Evelina. So that was my question. What right do I have to do that, and what was I going to be? What was my intention with it? It was quite a struggle for a while.
That's interesting. Mark, did you have any ethical dilemmas?
Well, no, I didn't. I have a character, Jagdeep Kaur, in my book, and I love Jagdeep. And when I first wrote Cutter's End, I wrote Jagdeep Kaur, and I used these characteristics. And then I'd written this fabulous cop who I really love, and then I realised after I've written it, my gosh, I know someone called Jagdeep, and I really like Jagdeep. Jagdeep was a worker for me when I worked at La Trobe, actually. And I thought, and I didn't know Jagdeep very well, but I really admired her a lot. And I wrote her an email and I said, oh my God, Jag, I don't know if you're going to kill me or what you're going to do, but and I said, I don't even know you very well, because we only worked together, she was my boss for a short time, but I really liked her as a boss. She was one of those, this is what you do, you go here, you do this, the very best sort of boss when you're first in a new job and nervous. And I said to Jag, I've used your name, Jag, and I've used your characteristics that I really like those practical. And I said, if you want me to change it, I'll make, it Narelle Brown. Whatever. If you want me to change, whatever. And she wrote back and said, I love this, and I'm thinking of becoming a cop. But I was driving along the road the other day on the way to Baruga, where my brother lives, and I got a phone call from a friend who said, have you seen on Facebook, on the ABC Book Club, what's going on? And I said no, because I've got off Facebook. I hate that. And she said, maybe you should look back on and have a look. And I logged back on. I pulled over, and I logged back on, and I got onto the ABC Book Club group, and someone had written, Sikh women don't wear turbans, and this is a big mistake, and it's like, and then there was so many comments saying, more than you'd believe, comments saying kind of these horrible things like, this author's got it all wrong, this author should have checked, this is bad editing, and I thought, what do I do? Because I've got a friend who wears a turban named Jag. I know this, and I didn't know what to do. But in the end, I just wrote. There was all these horrible sort of comments. Some were very supportive. I noticed some Indian women, for example, were starting to write back, quite firmly too. And then I just wrote back and I said, hi everyone. I worked with someone called Jag, and she was unreal, or something like that. So some Sikh women do wear turbans. That's all I wrote, and then I got off it, and I haven't heard of it since. But it really made me. It made me question, what I was doing. So yeah, that's.
Even though you actually had somebody. That it was, maybe unconsciously based on. Yeah, it wasn't a research thing where you do research things and people will question you and you go, did I? Maybe I made that up.
But this is a really, great person who I'm still in contact with, and so it was. But that made me feel wary of doing that, which is kind of a shame because I really love Jag's characteristics, and I don't know. Yeah.
Just stay off Facebook. How about that? I also, this is something that you were mentioning before, Alison, about the setting, and there's a very strong sense of place in these three books. They're very different books, but they have a lot in common, and this is one of them. Whether it's, and I was amazed about the descriptions of the countryside around Suva, which I've only ever seen, in recent years, of course, the jungle and the narrow paths and all that sort of stuff. Sense of place there, Regency, London, and out in the countryside, even if it's a sitting room, we have a sense of place, and of course, Broken Bay. How important is that setting, that place in crime generally? Like, do you notice it when you're reading crime? And how important was it to recreate that in your books? Start with you, Mark, because it's really striking.
For me, landscape is kind of everything. It's the first, so everything I've ever written, the first port of call is landscape. It's the lens through which everything I've written, whether it be fiction or non-fiction or plays, even plays. And it's how I come up with ideas. My first thing I think of a landscape, and usually a landscape that I know, that I'm familiar with. So for me, landscape is everywhere. It infiltrates every single part of the characters, everything. It determines the plot. It determines what characters are going to be and what happens. So my first thing with all the three books that I've got and my short stories, I always think of a landscape that I know. So for me, it's absolutely integral. It is the number one thing. Yep.
Thank you. Alison?
Well, it's a kind of a double whammy, isn't it, with crime and historical fiction, where you really that setting is so important, and it's a feedback loop. As my characters are walking through that landscape, their privilege makes that landscape very different from someone who's of the lower orders, as they were considered, and then there's gendered spaces as well, very strictly in that era. Women barely made it into the snooker room often, in that kind of thing. And there was a withdrawing to the drawing room where men were left in the dining room, things like that. So these kind of, we kind of get a feeling that it's a very interior world, but in fact they were outside a lot. So there's that great delight in being able to describe the beautiful furnishings, because everything that your characters use and touch is adding to their characterization. So if they decide to, I think Julia can't quite decide where to put the sofa in her drawing room, and so that's a characteristic of hers, that she's kind of a little bit undecided. And so it's that kind of, that setting is informing character and also creating plot possibilities and limitations. So if I decide to set something in Vauxhall Garden, then that Vauxhall Garden, which is a real place, suddenly its realistic parameters will inform what I'm writing. So those are the kind of things that I'm thinking about when I'm building those historical settings, and there's a lot of research involved. And actually that's what my PhD was on, which is going to the places and walking the ground, which is one of your terms, which I borrowed. Thank you very much.
Anytime.
I did cite. So being able to get the sensory impression of the space, and how that space hits you emotionally and intellectually and physically as well. It's very important to be able to do that. For me, it's very important so that I can create that immersive world for the reader.
Yeah, following on from that, I just came back from Fiji, and my next book, there are scenes set in a Fijian village, and I got the absolute privilege of going and spending the night at this isolated village in the middle of a crater, like on an island where hardly anybody goes, and it was just amazing, and it really has helped me with writing those things. So yes. What did you call it? Walking the site?
Walking the ground.
Walking the ground. Yep. So I've done some walking the ground, and it was awesome. But yeah, I was going to say with my with the first book in particular, but also the second book, there's my character has just arrived in Fiji 6 months ago in the first book, and he's not doing very well there. He doesn't have any friends. He has one friend. By the end of the book, he has 2 friends. So he's coming in with that outsider perspective, so you're kind of getting that setting from the outsider perspective as well, which I think is a common theme, and I think a little bit in Broken Bay as well. Yeah. So I think that's a common device as well.
Yeah, and he's not coping well with the heat.
No, you'd think he would.
Yeah.
He's Indian, but yeah, and he's not loving it. He's come from Hong Kong. You would think he would be great at heat.
Yeah, at humidity.
Yeah.
No. So let's pick up on that idea of research now. I should just warn you that Alison and I can talk about this for several hours. So if we get too carried away, just tell us to move on. But so let's talk about that. So you lived in Fiji for a while when you were writing the first book as well?
I went to Fiji for 2 months in 2016 to do research for the first book. It was my first time in Fiji as an adult on my own, or ever on my own. So it was a really interesting experience because we left Fiji when I was 3, and we would go back relatively often, but we were completely sheltered. We were not allowed to go anywhere. Fiji, for me, was a series of families' houses. So it was really fascinating to go there and actually see the country for myself. But unlike most people's visions of a trip to Fiji, I spent all my time at the National Archives with their dinky microfilm machine that didn't work very well. that gave me a backache. And then at the university library and at births, deaths and marriages, because I was also trying to trace some family history at the time. So I made it to the beach once.
So how did you find out the stuff about how Suva was physically at that time? And, it's only a couple of 100 yards and then they're in the jungle on this tiny little track.
Yeah, so the Fiji Times, I keep banging on about the Fiji Times. I should see if I can get some kickbacks or something from them. And there are excerpts from the Fiji Times in the book.
Mostly real, aren't they?
They're mostly real, yeah. So I got a lot from there. So a lot of things like the state of the roads, the fact that they didn't have lighting at night, all of that sort of stuff I got from topics that were being debated at the time in the newspaper. Other than that, old maps, like the old surveying type stuff. That's pretty much it. Yeah. And old photographs and all of the usual stuff. Cool.
Marg, don't tell me you went cave diving.
I didn't go cave diving. I've been snorkeling in some of them, and I've been to them, to the known ones, and one unknown one. But I found it. I went and read the coroner's reports for every single cave diving death that has occurred in Australia since the late 60s. And, I woke up, I used to wake up in the night with my own hand over my and terrified. But what I found, the leading cause of death in the late 60s and early 70s, they cited it as panic. And I became really interested in nitrogen narcosis.
I'm feeling a little breathless just thinking about it.
Nitrogen narcosis is when cave divers, when you go down you can go down 20 metres, and then every 10 metres you go down below that, it's the equivalent, you start getting nitrogen narcosis, and they call it the martini effect, because it's the equivalent, every 10 metres down, it's the equivalent of having one martini. So, and for a writer, that's a gift. All of this was a gift because there's that horrible nitrogen narcosis, but then there's the martini effect, which is really nice. So, and all this stuff. But there's a sinkhole southwest of Mount Gambier, not a very well known, but the cave divers really love. And they go down there, and there's an old Tirana down there, because farmers used to throw cars, and they go down there and they're narked, and they go down and they try and read the odometer, but when they come up there, everyone's wrong because they're all off their faces. So I read these sort of horrible things, and the whole scratching on the like it's true, all those things, but I read some really amazing things like the rescues, and we've got some of the best. We've got 600 registered cave divers in Australia, and they're some of the best in the world. And our cave diving sites have the best visibility in the world. The only problem, of course, is that they're limestone. So if you scratch it with a tiny bit with your flipper, just a tiny bit, then visibility can be reduced to 0 in 5 seconds. So it's this perilous. It's this, for the subterranean world, the terror, the beauty and the terror. It was great to research, but it was terrifying in a way. Yeah, but I liked it.
I'm glad you just walked the ground. You didn't swim it. Alison Goodman.
Yes.
Do tell us a little about your Regency research.
My Regency research has been
a bonnet.
has been long and involved. I do own a Regency wardrobe full of clothes. I do, yeah. I have worn bonnets and corsets to see what it was like, and especially for the Lady Helen books, because there was weaponry to be wielded in gowns. So I had to go and trial that out. I think that, I know, it was fun.
So, can you you swing a sword with a corset and ball gown?
You can.
That sort of
You can.
question.
I mean,
Yeah.
the Regency corset finishes just here at the Empire lines, so that you're not constrained, and it's a little bit of protection if you go. That's a little bit of. So yeah, there's no worries. You can swing your swords, ladies. Yes.
Should a demon attack you? You know you can.
Well, I mean, there's no pockets. This is the problem.
Where do you keep the swords?
Well, obviously you have someone carrying them for you.
You're dashingly handsome offsider, I believe, appears
that
from
footman?
nowhere with a sword.
Where's that footman that you've got? Yeah. And I do like to do the kind of immersive research. I went to a Guildhall ball in Bath, and that was a purely Regency setup. In fact, so much so that my darling husband agreed to borrow a Regency outfit from the National Theatre there and get all kitted up because you had to go in costume. And it was in the hottest day in Bath for a very long time. So here we are I was in silks and a silk gown and many petticoats and chemises and things like that. He was in a wool coat with breeches and silk stockings and this and the hat and this kind of thing. So we roll up and of course the Guildhall has no air conditioning. They have some windows open and the lady there, which was so funny, she had not calculated for heat at all. So when my husband, who is very much a maverick Regency gentleman, started to take off his coat, she sort of said, no, you can't take off your coat. And he's got to look at her, and then the MC kind of dashes to the front of the stage and says, gentlemen, you can take off your coat. We cannot afford the ambulance fees. So they all took off their coats and that. And so that was a wonderful event because it was set up exactly like a Regency ball. The dances were called, it was full-on Regency long ways dancing. And I got asked to dance for every dance, just like Lydia Bennett. And I will tell you that it was very robust and very, very hot. So what I did learn from that was that I had this silk gown on and I had a petticoat, corset and chemise. And when I finished all that dancing, and it was 2 hours of dancing, I was still pristine on the outside, but underneath it was wringing wet. And when I got home, I literally had to peel all the underclothes off. And this was how they kept pristine on the top layers, and kept their silks nice. But underneath, it was just like it was so revolting. And so that was a kind of sensory research that I love to understand what was going on there and how tiring it was to dance every dance, but how much frisson was involved in that kind of dancing where you're meeting eyes, even with strangers, and hands, and we had gloves and these kind of things. And even though it was just that everything was charged because you were just touching and moving away, and just the joy of dance, the felicity of motion, I think it is, isn't it? Yeah. So these are the kind of things that I love to do, and which bring, I think, a lot of that visceral sense to the writing. And I definitely find that when I'm thinking about writing dance scenes or writing scenes in Vauxhall Gardens, because I've been to the site of Vauxhall Gardens and walked that ground, that I can bring that into my own sense, into my point of view character's sense of that world. So it's a very privileged thing to do. It takes money and it takes an investment of time. And of course, people, when they're writing historical fiction or any type of fiction, don't need that type of research to build wonderful settings. But, for me, it's a part of my process and I really enjoy it. So, yeah, it's just wonderful. And when COVID hit, I just done most of my research and I had a little bit more to go, and I sort of was starting to book my trip. And suddenly this right that I had to move anywhere in the world that was safe to move, it was suddenly gone. In fact, we couldn't go beyond 5 kilometres. And so I had to rethink, how do I research these things when I can't have this lovely way of researching. So that was a learning moment too. It was also part of my PhD. So suddenly I had to go and say, oh, wait a minute, I'm writing about travelling to places and I can't travel. So yes, that was part of the process as well. But yeah, it's wonderful.
Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about process then, just to wind up. When we're writing crime, do you plot from the start? And then once, if well, depending on whether you do or not, then what do you do about other things that need to happen in the story in terms of clues or red herrings or those sorts of structural questions? You can start.
I do plot. I don't know how I do it. I sit there and agonise over it and come up with something and then keep refining it. And yeah, it's, for me, it is actually, the crime part of it is actually the hardest part. Like, I don't have enough bodies. Not enough people have died yet. I need somebody else to die. Yes, that is probably for me the most challenging part. So I don't have any good answers. That's all right.
I used to be very much a plotter. So I used to have storyboards and everything sort of tightly controlled. And I'm up to my 8th book now, so things are a bit looser, a bit more organic. I have plot beats that have to be kept, and also parts of the crime that have to happen so that I know that it's going to all work out. But in between all that, I've got a lot more organic growth of character.
So you do those plot beats at the beginning?
I do, and I know where I'm going to end up.
Okay.
Wow. Yeah, so it's because there's 3 stories within the book. Each of them had their own structure. I love structuring things. Their own structure, and then there was an overarching mystery structure as well. So there was a triple kind of, 4 structures to build, and then I had to bring home the structure at the end to finish off the book as a novel. And that was the big challenge, and that took quite a while to figure out, but it was very satisfying when I kind of got there.
Thank you. Marg, because you had really two crimes that you were juggling.
Yeah, and I wish I was more like the two of you, because I don't plan, and I don't plan because it's how I like writing. It's sort of what gives me joy, is if I sit down. So I read the last paragraph that I've written, and then I write on from that. So I think with Cutter's End, I found out who the killer was at about 62,000 words, and Stonetown, I think it was the same. And I always, my books are due. I'm a 1 book a year person, so my books are due on December the 23rd. So usually what are we in October? So usually by the end of October, I'm panicking, walking along, going, who the hell killed this? Why is this old lady dead? Or what's happening? And then, but it's not a complete hot mess. I have a cast of characters and key suspects, and then usually one day I'm walking, around in the bush near my house, and I find out. Well, I wait for that, and I find out who it is, and I go yes, and then I run home, and then I have to add in all those other things. So it's not like it's all beautifully plotted that I have to go back and work and make that work. But I think I'm up to my 4th one this year, and I think I said to Bernie, my husband, I think I know who it is. But I remember in Stonetown, I was so panicked, and the publishers were saying, is the book almost done? And I was going, I don't even know who did the goddamn thing. And I remember one time I woke up in the night and I said, I had a nightmare, and I said to Bernie, Angela Merkel did it. And it was a nightmare, and I don't even know why, because I have no interest in German politics. I don't know why, but I still don't know why. But so I was panicking, I think. But I think I know now this time. I've got a little bit better. But it's not like, I do have a key list, and then I have to go home and add in, Callie, as you know, those red herrings and that sort of stuff.
Well, actually, there's almost 3 possible crimes in herrings.
Oh, nightmare. Yes, there is. Yeah.
Oh, now I need to know all about this. So, do you just start anywhere?
No, I start, so in my head I think of a landscape. So this current landscape, and it's got to be one I know, is I'm from Beechworth. This one's roughly the Razorback Walk. So I think about that, and then I think of so I write the crime, a body, and then that's when the next morning I wake up and I go paragraph, read the last one, read the last one, read the last one, and then by October, November I'm panicking, having nightmares, but then it comes to me and then I put in the red herrings and then I fix it up. But it's the way, but I think I do it that way because I love it. It makes me happy. So I sit down, and when I find out who the killer is, I go, yes, of course, and then I run home and I say, shut up everyone, go away everyone, and I just write, and I love it, and it makes me so happy. And I think if ever I have to stop doing like that, I'm just not going to do it anymore. I've got a day job. I'm a teacher. I can, but at the moment I'm still like it. Maybe one day it won't work, but at the moment it is.
So you get to be the detective, right?
Yeah, and that's what I
You
like.
get to solve it as well as make it.
Yeah, and I go, of course they did it. And then I'm so excited when I find out.
We should wrap up in a minute, but let me just ask, now I forgot what time we started. What time we start after all that? About 22. Anyway, let me just ask then what you're working on now. You're working on book 2. What's next?
So
Same
book two-
character?
Book 2 is the next in the series.
Is he any happier?
A little bit, yeah.
Oh, good.
I mean, not completely happy. He's a battler, my main character. So book 2 is the second in the series. I've got a trilogy planned, which sort of roughly follows the path of the indentured servants. So I'll try and be quick. So indentured servants would go there for 5 years on the plantation under contract. Then they would have 5 years in the colony as free people, and at the end of the 10 years, a journey would be paid for back to India, which you could take or not take, up to you. So the third book will be focused on stay or go, but the second one, which I'm working on right now, which is called A Shipwreck in Fiji, will be focused on people who are living free in the colony, and there are some German pirates. If that
Excellent.
influences.
Angela Merkel did it. Alison, you've got book 2.
Yes. So I've just delivered book 2 of the Ill-Mannered Ladies. I can tell you the title. It's The Ill-Mannered Ladies on the Road to Wreck and Ruin.
Excellent.
So the book starts the day after the ending of the first book. So we go straight on to it. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you.
And mine is not Margariti, this next one. It's a new character, but it's set, and that's due. But I know it's hard though, because I'm kind of, next year I think I'll write another Margariti, but I thought I'd give him a break for a while. And then this one is a new character, and it's out in July, 1st of July next year, and the title is The Precipice.
Ooh.
Precipice. And if you've got any ideas about who did it, just have a quick chat to me afterwards, because I've got some input.
All right. Well, let's take our break now, but before we do, please thank these 3 wonderful writers.
And Kelly, thank you.
That's a pleasure.
Thank you, Kelly.
So, now, as the sisters all know, there will... All right then, who has a question for the panel or one of the panel members? Whoa! You were first, I think.
Wait a minute. Can I name?
Oh, you have to say your name for the judge.
And it has to be in the microphone.
And wait for the microphone. And remember, make it a short, sharp question. This question or murder may be committed. Go. Tina.
As I was talking to Margaret before, as an educator of little people from prep to grade 6, how do I continue to inspire, particularly my girls, to be creative writers? How do I inspire them at the school level?
Mark's dying to answer this. All of you. You start, Mark. Inspire.
How do I inspire? Do you know what? But you know this. I reckon reading. Reading is everything, isn't it? Yeah. You know, I reckon reading. Yeah.
Well, just following on from that, when I was a kid, what inspired me was hearing a teacher read a book out with such pleasure and relish, doing all the voices for me as a kid. And also, my mum bought the book for me to follow along so that I was increasing my own kind of reading ability as the teacher was reading. And that really was, one of the stepping stones for me as a creative writer.
I have no experience as an educator, so I can only speak as somebody who was educated. I remember 2 projects from school involving creative writing that I loved, and I can still remember doing them, and both of them were about writing journals. So one, I went to Fiji, and we were taken out of school to go to Fiji in primary school, and they asked us, all I had to do to make up my grades was write a journal, and that was so memorable. And then in year 12, I was asked to write a journal, and we weren't allowed to talk about boys, and it was great. And I got asked if they could use mine as a sample for the next year, and that was really validating, and that would be my best advice.
Thank you. Next question.
Right here in front.
My name's Caroline. Do you think we are going to find that in the future, for example, in 2043 or 3014 or even later, allowing for the Regency period, now that we have DNA testing, we have CCTV everywhere and surveillance, isn't it going to be very boring for the female historical crime fiction writers of the future?
Writing about now.
Writing about now?
Yep.
Historically.
Anybody like to go?
Well, I think it's about, you're quite right, we're under surveillance, and it's a very kind of, we are surveilled a lot in many various ways, and it's probably the people who can slide between that surveillance where the crime happens. So I think that is quite interesting, and always it's a kind of those minds that want to step away from law and order are always going to be interesting, whatever form that takes. So I think that the crimes that are being committed now and will be committed in the future will be quite heinous enough, I think, to satisfy the writers of tomorrow. Yeah, I think that it's a bit grim, a bit dark, but the human mind is inexhaustible in its ways of being able to break the law.
And can I just add to that, having grown up and still live in the country, there's an awful lot of black spots still with no reception. You don't get reception. Telstra's not around my way yet.
And I think I would just say that crime fiction, it's not all about the crime. There's all of the human aspects to it as well, so I think it'll remain interesting.
Thank you.
Celia, so it's more directed at Alison. Did you use any of the letters that are in any of the source material to get the feel of the time and the communication? Or did you read any of the books that were written during that time to get a sense of the language, the syntax, the pacing?
Thank you. That's a great question. I did read some journals of women of the time, and definitely some of the fiction that was written. Madame D'Arblay's diaries were fantastic. For the new book, I've been reading letters by a series of quite famous women. So those were great ways of being able to feel that syntax and to feel the way that gossip was delivered, because there's very specific ways that gossip is delivered. There's ways that information is you've got to read between the lines. There was a kind of propensity to be all chirpy and that kind of thing, but beneath he's thinking, really, that the maid has died, So these are kind of the ways that they were writing was very interesting. And also I have almost the whole collection of 1812 the Times newspapers, which were very, very interesting, and also La Belle Assemblée, which was one of the magazines, and they were just fantastic. They were just fashion plates, interior design, political comments, so they were great.
Why am I pointing? I just point and you give the microphone to someone else. Nearest person is not a criteria.
Rushendo is my name. Rushendo, yeah. My question is about tax deductions. In particular, if you are researching a Regency ball, can you claim those undergarments?
I claimed everything. Number one closet.
I managed to swing underwear as it happens today.
Sorry, I'm not very close to anyone else asking a question. My question... my name's Shamini. My question's for Nalima, which is, how did the process of writing this book interact with your cultural confusion?
Yeah, it was a real journey of self-discovery. I think before I started writing this, I grew up in North Queensland. There were not a lot of Fijian Indians around. I was related to all of the ones who were around. I just never connected with being Fijian. I never connected with being Indian. I would get really annoyed probably all the way through my 20s if you asked me where I was from and persisted because what you wanted to hear was Indian. I would just sit there going, I'm from Australia, I'm from Fiji, and eventually I would have, when people would look disappointed and go, oh, I thought you were Indian, I'd be like, yeah, I am, just to really confuse people. But with this, I think I grew up, that between different worlds and multi-hyphenated. I'm not Australian Indian, I'm not Australian Fijian, I'm Australian Fijian Indian. Like, there's a lot of hyphens going on there. And I think I used to feel that each of those hyphens reduced how much I belonged, particularly in Australia. And I feel like since I've done all the research and spent a lot of time in Fiji and talked to a lot of people, I feel like it's increased my sense of belonging in everywhere. Like in here, in Fiji, it's increased my sense of belonging as part of the Indian, the wider Indian, I always say this word wrong, diaspora. It's been, it's a great question, and it's been hugely impactful for me.
Thank you. And can I just follow that up, actually? You said you were doing some family history. Did it also help with you understanding your family history there? It was very woefully unsuccessful. But no, you're right, it did, because I had conversations with my father that revealed things about my family history that I just didn't know about, and which were the reasons that it was woefully unsuccessful. But yeah, I did learn a lot about my family as well. Yeah, thank you.
My name's Lorraine. This is to all three of you. When you're writing historical fiction, I think one of the biggest hardest things to deal with is all this research you do and what you put in, what you leave out. Do you find this a real challenge?
Yep. Yes. Yeah, definitely. I read a lot and learnt a lot, and the temptation is to just stuff it all in there. So yes, you definitely had to learn to only include things that were relevant to the plot and not make my plot go off in all sorts of weird, wonderful directions, so I could get that bit of information in that I wanted to relay.
I suppose I approached, in the beginning, research in different ways. So I was able to spend 8 months months of just deep diving into the world of the Regency, looking at the political and the social, so that when I was writing, when I thought about how they were going to light a room and what level of society was going to light that room, I'd have that information there. So I had this sort of foundation level of information that I'd worked on. And then when I was writing the books, my research became a lot more pointed, so I knew what in a sense, knew what I was looking for. So there wasn't that temptation to actually stuff everything in. And you're right, it's about what works for the plot and what, I've got this kind of sort of half-assed kind of loose rule that if I start to go beyond 3 or 4 sentences of description, get out of there. Move the plot along. So so not a lot of sort of staying in one place, always moving things forward.
I don't know.
A microphone.
I've almost forgotten what the question is. Research. What to leave out? I found heaps of great stuff about cave diving and the sinkholes, and there was lots of things and lots of really, scary stories and things. But I agree, it comes down to plot, doesn't it? What you can, what moves the plot forward. Yeah.
But can I just say, I loved how much I learnt about cave diving, etc., reading your book. So
Yeah, we all know not to go down them. That's the main lesson. Next question. Vicky.
My name's Vicky. I want to follow on from what you were talking about, Marg, with your Facebook experience, and a question for all of you. Given that it is really research intensive with what you're doing, how do you respond when we were talking about the certainty of the incorrect, when they post about, no, you're wrong, how do you respond? Do you respond? And part 2, if you could get away with it, how would you like to respond?
I'm going to go first because mine's really quick. Just write about something obscure and then nobody's going to call you. So I haven't had that experience yet. Except for one of my characters' names is Taviti, and I made up a lot of names. I made up a plantation name that is many, many syllables, and the Fijian language is not spoken as it's not phonetic. So my father had to do the pronunciation guide for the audiobook, and he could not say that plantation name. But generally speaking, I have not had that experience because people just don't know very much about Fiji. So,
There's websites devoted to pointing out holes in Regency research in books.
Phonetics.
So I've had a couple of... I try and research so that I've got a couple of, resources for one kind of fact, if you know what I mean. Just like kind of journalists. And if there's room in between research where I can slide in and do my own stuff, I will. But I make sure that there is that gap there so that I can do it so that there's not going to be anyone saying, well, actually, they never put their reticle in the cloakroom, blah, blah, blah. And I have had one person write to me and say that in Lewis, my character walks down in a downward direction when it should have been up. And I went, you're probably right. So it gets down to that level. I generally think to myself, I do the rule of, do not respond. It never ends well. And how I would like to respond would definitely not end well.
I did respond to that one, but it was just a sort of a cheerful kind of a, hello, I do know someone who is a Sikh woman who wears a turban and she's brilliant, or something like that. And then I quickly logged off but what I would like to do, Vicky, there's a really small sinkhole just southwest of Gippsland, it's not many people know about it. Yeah.
That's like Vicky and her cliff. Any more questions?
I have one. Lindy. This is for Alison. It's 3 parts. First of all, is book 2 a series of novellas again? Is there going to be a book 3, and will the book 2 have as much shit in it as book 1 did?
As much shit.
So much shit, yes.
Literal shit. So the first question was, is there
Is it novellas like the...
So it's going to be in 2 novellas. And I'd just like to point out here that the original idea for the Benevolent Society of Ill-Mannered Ladies was prompted by Lindy. She asked me to write a short story for an anthology called And Then. And so the guiding light was you have to have 2 characters who were a duo, a crime-fighting duo, adventure duo, and they had to have an Australian connection. And I really wanted to write the Regency, so the male character in my books, Lord Evan, has been transported and returned from Australia. So that was my connection, and Lindy let me get away with it. It was very slight. So that's how it came to be in novellas. That was the originating story. So there's 2 in the next book. And I wanted to try what it would be like to write 2 novellas rather than 3, because rather than the 3-act structure, there is not as much shit. Yes.
Good.
Yeah.
We're talking excrement, people, not bad stuff.
And there will there be a 3rd book? Not contracted yet, so if you do like the book, please review it somewhere. All authors love you to review. It's the way that we get our contracts renewed. It's the way that we get, things like that. So if you have a chance, even just stars will help us.
Yeah. Don't point out any anachronisms or inconsistencies in the research. All right, I think that is time for questions. Thank you all very much for your questions. Louisa Larkin, do you have a winner of the best question for us?
Yes, I do, and I think there's been some brilliant questions tonight. I particularly like the practical nature of the tax question. That's all kind of, we all worry about that sort of thing. How much can we squeeze out of that situation? I also love the kind of the question which was about inspiring, future authors. When they're at school, how do you get them interested? Yeah. But I have to say, the winner is Vicky with her question about how do you deal with people who challenge you on Facebook and other social media, and what would the panel really like to say if they could get away with it? So I think, Vicky, I love the question.
Vicky, you win a copy of Kerry Greenwood's Murder in Williamstown. Congratulations. And if you're Vicky's friend on Facebook, you know exactly how she responds to proposed marriage.
Oh, yes. There you go. Congratulations.
Don't go on. Okay. All right. Here we go. Oh, not voting properly. What's happening here?
You had too much to drink, huh?
No, it's a machine. Jesus, Lindy. Doesn't stop you now. It's not working. I think it's going to take the camera down.